Well, there's so many types of leaders, some very bad leaders and some that are okay. But if we compare, let's say, the typical good leader to the superboss leader, the really big difference is that superbosses um, do a series of activities that really accelerate the performance of their teams. That most good leaders, they do some of them, I'll say, some good leaders, but they don't do all of them. And it relates to how you find talent, how you motivate talent, how you think about vision, how you develop talent day to day, how you think about teams, all of those kind of core dimensions.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of Blue Email Podcast. This is Bustian, and I'm very happy that today I can say hello to Sydney Finkelstein. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Professor Sydney is from Tech School of Business at Dartmouth College, and he's very well known book writer, speaker, and author of SUPERBOSSES: How Exceptional Leaders Master the Flow of Talent, and his latest book, the SUPERBOSSES Playbook. Let's talk about SUPERBOSSES, if we may. What's the definition of a superboss that our people could listen to or read in your book? What is the superboss? What's the definition of a superboss?
So a superboss is in short, it's a leader that creates other leaders. It's a leader that sees the potential in other people, often before they even see it themselves. And the superboss sees works in a way so that he or she generates talent really on a continual basis. So it's someone that really helps other people advance their careers, and at the same time, they themselves get better in the process. So these are the two things they do at the same time. They help you accelerate your career, and they actually, because of that, because they're surrounded by this great talent, they actually do better than they otherwise would.
And looking at or reading the book and having sort of information about what are the characteristics of these bosses, how do they go about their business? We understand what the outcome is, but what's different between the super bosses and the normal managers, the normal leaders that haven't actually made that step?
Well, there's so many types of leaders, some very bad leaders and some that are okay. But if we compare, let's say, the typical good leader to the superboss leader, the really big difference is that superbosses do a series of activities that really accelerate the performance of their teams. That most good leaders, they do some of them, I'll say, some good leaders, but they don't do all of them. And it relates to how you find talent, how you motivate talent, how you think about vision, how you develop talent day to day, how you think about teams, all of those kind of core dimensions. What we learned from the research is that superboss leaders actually do a few things that are different than even the typical good bosses.
And what is that difference? I mean, are there small little details, or is it a number of very small things, but it's just the sheer number or the sheer discipline, or is it sort of somewhere in between? What are those things?
Oh, there are many things.
Okay.
We'd have to walk through every one of them.
Okay.
There are many things that superboss leaders do that really are different. It's almost like a new model of talent and of leadership.
But if before you actually developed and wrote your book and you were doing the research, was there sort of in figuring out all these things, was there a big surprise in there? Was there something that really surprised you? You never had thought that really worked so well, that specific technique or that specific thing people, very successful leaders were doing that you didn't think had such a big impact?
Yeah, I think there were several, starting even with how common the pattern was that I found across many industries and even different countries in terms of how superbosses went about their business. And maybe the biggest surprise is how they do a bunch of things that might not make sense when you first start to think about it. They're almost paradoxical. For example, they delegate. They're very big delegators, which we understand, but they're also very hands-on. Not quite a micromanager, but they get close. And most of the time, if you ask people, describe your boss to me, they might say, well, he's a micromanager. He doesn't give me any leeway at all. Or they might say, he's great. He delegates to me. I have a real chance to do things. Well, super boss leaders do both of those things. Again, not quite micromanagement, but very, very hands-on. So they do both of those things at the same time. And most models of leadership, most experience with leadership, most people don't really appreciate or understand, I think, that the beauty of the best leaders, these superboss leaders, is that they combine opposites, almost like a yin and a yang together, if you know what I mean. And that's pretty interesting.
And talking, because this yin yang and the micromanager versus hands-on, because there's a very delicate line between being a micromanager and being hands-on. Was there any pattern of, I know from my personal experience, the worst you can hear is, oh, you're such a micromanager. Why are you constantly working with me? Where's that thin line? Is there a thin line that is sort of quite well defined, or is that sort of something people just try to run and make sure that they don't go over too many times?
Yeah, well, the truth is it's a little bit tricky. A micromanager is someone who does your work for you. They tell you exactly what to do, and they even do some of it because they don't trust you to do it. Superboss leaders will never go that far.
Okay.
They do expect you to do your work, and they expect it to be done at a very high level. But they're going to, what they do is they don't just delegate and assign work and forget about you. They delegate, they assign, and then they're going to check in with you, interact with you. And they're actually very big teachers when you really think about that. They teach other people all the time on their team. And that's what they do. So maybe the question to ask, for a listener who wants to be more like a superboss leader in this respect, but doesn't want to go over the line, the questions you might ask yourself is, am I spending any time teaching people on my team? Or am I spending my time just telling them what to do? I think that would be a useful question. And
talking about the bad practices, what were in doing all this research, what are the biggest failures you actually found? And I believe there were quite a few, but what are some of the surprising successful leaders, whatever? Probably there were some that also had some big failures. Were there anything surprising that you discovered on the other side of the spectrum?
Well, on the other side of the spectrum, actually, it turns out that I did a lot of research specifically on failure and mistakes that leaders make. Mm-hmm. And I wrote that book was called Why Smart Executives Fail, and it came out, maybe a decade before Superbosses. And there were a bunch of very systematic things we identified that really poor leaders, failing leaders did. And with respect to Superbosses and specific leadership ideas and techniques, Why Smart Executives Fail leaders looked at people in their team as people to be blamed if something went wrong, people to be told what to do, people that would not be given an opportunity to have an impact. Exact opposite to the superboss leaders. The superboss leaders, of course, are far from perfect. Nobody is. The thing that they do that is sometimes problematic is that they're really, really intense. So it's not necessarily for everyone. If you work for a superboss leader, they're really going for it. They don't just dial it in and work at a 50% or a 75% pace. They are really going all out. And so if you work for a superboss leader, you have to be prepared to do that. Otherwise, it's not going to work out. And the risk from the superboss leader is that some people can get burned out from that intensity.
Superbosses in crisis situations versus normal situations, meaning, a company where decision making for whatever reason needs to start happening quicker. Do superbosses change their habits, or do they sort of operate the same way and delegate and check on in the same manner with the same routine regardless of which stage or which situation they're in? Or is there sort of some patterns of if it's more crisis, they sort of take over more control and they become less, let's call it teaching and delegating, whereas when there's a normal situation, is there sort of a pendulum like that, or they have this style that goes beyond what kind of a situation a company sits in at a specific point in time?
That's an interesting question. So when it comes to crisis, one thing that superboss leaders are particularly adept at is they stay calm. They don't panic, which is pretty important because people get nervous very easily. And they instill a sense of confidence and calmness even to the people around them. So they actually thrive when it comes to more of a crisis situation. And in fact, they tend to look at change and disruption as more of an opportunity than a threat, which is very very interesting. I asked specifically about, are they always teachers? And certainly, when there's a lot of pressure, teaching, the work has to get done. But the teaching is not like it's not like you're in a classroom teaching. It's like a 30-second conversation or a two-minute point that you're making or a 5-minute point that you're making. And that part never goes away.
Okay, so in some sense, the thing that makes them different is they basically, despite their intensity, crisis situations actually brings calmness around them, so that people around them actually have an easier time once the crisis comes out. Tell me a little bit about these super bosses and what I call, when is enough enough? I mean, when do they start thinking about changing people? How much time do they give? Are they sort of more about results and make sure that results come out? Or are they more towards the path onto the path of giving people more time? Or is it sort of that's not really part of the equation of a super boss?
Yeah. So yeah, they do push people hard. That's for sure. They create a challenging performance environment, performance culture. They have high expectations, and they demand performance. So there's no question about that. But they also are very inspirational. People like to work. I mean, not always, but they usually work for us because they get inspired by that person. And so that combination together really helps them, I think, in getting people to be part of what they're trying to do. But having said that, superboss leaders they're not afraid of firing people. Let's put it that way. They're not afraid of moving people away. They're your classic experimenters and entrepreneurs. An entrepreneur in the modern economy we're in today, and have been for some time now, cannot be expected to come up with a perfect idea right out of the box. Everything needs pivoting, adjustment, learning, agility, adaptation, these words, right? And it's true. And so superboss leaders are like that. And they're like that with respect to how they think about and work with people on their teams or in their companies. And they'll give you a chance to figure things out, but they won't give you many chances. You're going to be expected to produce and to perform, and they're not afraid to make the changes in their team as a result.
It's interesting you talk about pivoting, because I just read an interesting piece about sort of startup entrepreneurs, and one of the big failures is startup entrepreneurs think that pivoting is actually a sign of failure, whereas some empirical data lately shows that the ability to pivot quickly and find solutions quicker than in the past is vital for today's environment if you want to be successful, which is very aligned with what you talk about, sort of leaders. But so do these super bosses actually evolve faster than the normal bosses from a personal development perspective, or not? If they pivot and if they test out things and if they sort of have this intense, do they also have the same demanding, changing let's call it, view on the world, on themselves, so they change a lot, or are they, when compared to the others?
Yeah, yeah, another good question. They really are constant learners. They love to learn. They expect to learn, and they're even okay being challenged, which is unusual. Uh, as long as the challenge, if you're going to challenge a superboss leader with a different point of view, you better back it up. You better be prepared to support it, and they're going to engage in a real debate, an argument, even with you. Not that they want to. Not that they don't want to listen to you and learn something new. It's that they absolutely want to learn something new, but they want to make sure it's backed up with solid data, solid argumentation, with evidence, with a strong point of view. So they're constant learners. I also use the metaphor of a shark. You know how sharks are always swimming, always going off looking for something, going on the attack somewhere else. I don't know if superboss leaders are necessarily going on the attack all the time, but they are like sharks in that they're always looking for the next thing. They don't. They're not very complacent. They don't fall into the complacency trap, I would say. And so when you ask about their personal development, they are really attuned to always getting better. And part of it is that's their personality, but the other part is they're so engrossed in their jobs, in their business, in their vision, whatever it is that they do, that it means a lot to them. They care about it a lot, and they're not happy with just showing up and going through the motions. They're quite the opposite.
I know this is going to be a hard question, but if I were to come into a room with a networking event and there were some very top leaders of whatever country I'd be in there, is there, how would you advise me to find the super bosses between the 30, 40 people? What kind of, what are they, the ones that everybody's around them, or are they the ones that are quiet and listening? How do you how would I, do my little shark and find those 2, 3 that I'd really want to pick their brains because they are the super bosses in that environment? Is there something that defines them?
Well, I think the networking event scenario you're describing is probably not going to be the optimal way to identify a superboss, because their personalities vary. Yes, they're all driven, they're intense, but some are very nurturing to other people, and others are, I call them glorious bastards. In fact, they're really, really tough. So, you go in the networking, you start networking, you won't be able to pick them up just like that. Okay. Having said that, it turns out that there are some clues to find super bosses. If you're in a company, you'll probably know who they are, because the people that work for that person seem to be really accelerating their career. They seem to be doing well. They seem to just be getting smarter by the day. You also could track it, for people, in a bigger company, let's say, or any size company. People in HR could track it, because one of the things that happens is that people that work for the super bosses, they tend to get promoted quickly and often because of the benefits they're getting from a super boss. So there are some ways that you could look at this, and I feel like within a company, if you keep your eyes open, your ears open, and you're alert, and you watch how people work with people in their teams, and just pay attention to that, you're gonna begin to pick up some of the clues about who is more super boss like and who is less super boss like, and I think that's the way to do it.
In your research, when you were looking at super bosses, were there any interesting patterns of how they sort of picked talent before they started nurturing them? Were there any techniques you saw, or patterns of techniques that people that were super bosses, leaders that were super bosses did to attract the best people and before they actually worked for them?
Yeah, well, there are a bunch of things they do when it comes to attracting, identifying, recruiting, talent. And I'll share with you 2 or 3 of them. First, and I use this word already, they're real entrepreneurs when it comes to talent. They're always on the lookout for talent wherever they go. in the same way that an entrepreneur always seems to be thinking about the next business idea, super bosses are thinking about the next person that they might be able to hire or bring into their circle. And most of us don't go through our life that way. Some do, but most of us don't. We do what we do, but they're always thinking about it. And so, sometimes you see someone that has something special that you want to learn more about them. For example, actually, I've heard this from many people that talk to me about super bosses. When you go to a restaurant and your waiter, your server, is really good, not in just putting the plate down in front of you, but in how they interact with you. Some people just are very good interpersonally. Turns out that people like that have generalizable or transferable skills that work really well in any type of customer-facing job, customer relationship type job. And I've heard many people that are at restaurants end up striking up a conversation with their waiter, with their server. And in a number of instances, they end up hiring this person to work on something totally unrelated industry, but something that's more customer facing. So you only could do that if you're always thinking about it, always alert to potential talent. And then I'll share one more, which is they look for people, super bosses look for people where others often don't. I call that untapped talent pools, untapped talent pools. They're places where maybe others haven't looked at. So there are many examples. Say in America, there are many people in the military that are leaving the military because their tour of duty is up, and some of these endless wars are starting to unwind. And so these people might not know what a spreadsheet looks like, but they sure know about leadership. They sure know about teamwork. They sure know about dealing with challenge. And there are a bunch of companies that are targeting people like this to as potential team players, managers, employees, because of their life experience. There are many, many other examples I could share with you about untapped talent pools, but as an idea, it's something that I think everyone should be thinking about, because who doesn't say, our biggest problem is finding talent, finding great talent. Everybody always says that. But are we willing to be creative when it comes to looking for that talent? Super boss leaders are.
A lot of our, audience are sort of leaders that are in the mid 30s, thinking about sort of the next step, and they'll be listening to this and thinking, yeah, I want to become a super boss. What will, we will advise them to read the books and go for it. But what is something they could do on Monday that could sort of, that you would suggest, that 1, 2, or maybe 3 things that they should start thinking about to start that process of becoming an even better and moving maybe from being great to greatness, as you call it, super boss?
Sure. So number one, for your own team, for the people, even if there's one person who works for you or 10, whatever it is, spend the time to start to get to know who they are as a person and what their working style is and what they want in their life and in their career. And it turns out that if you spend some time really genuinely interested in the life of people that work for you and what they want in their jobs and in their career, because most people don't do that. If you actually did that in a genuine, authentic way, they're going to really react in a positive way to that. At least that's what we've seen in many, many instances. And so, for example, if someone's working for me and I were to do this, I'd sit down and I'd say, okay, where do you want to be, another year or two? Do you like this job? Are you thinking about a different challenge? Some people will be very happy doing what they're doing, and you might not even have to have a conversation like this, but many others, especially younger people, will have aspirations and they'll want to do something different. Find out what that is and say, okay, I'm going to help you get there. Here are some of the skills you need to get there, and I'm going to give you some opportunities to learn those skills while you're working for me. And it's something that you can do in almost every instance. So that's one very specific thing, looking internally. A second idea is to look externally, and here I'm thinking of the people that have worked for you in the past, past employees or team members or colleagues, and then people you work for in the past. Previous bosses that you have that are no longer, that you're no longer working with or for now. Find out where they are, and if you're not in touch with them, LinkedIn and other methods can help you get there, and start to schedule some time to check in with them and call them and see how they're doing. Because superboss leaders are really, really good at managing their network. And when you call someone who used to work for you, who's doing something else, now you start to rekindle or rebuild that relationship that may enable you to get an ongoing or a new return on investment from that relationship, because that person that used to work for you and now is doing something else, that person probably understands you, understands the job, understands your company pretty well. And they may be a source of business. They may be a source of opportunity. They may be a source of advice. All of those things are possible. And by the way, some of those people may even want to come back and work for you again after being away for a period of time. That's rather than looking at it as, somebody left and they betrayed me, you weren't loyal, rather than saying that, which of course is totally counterproductive to yourself. When you open the door for some of these other people, for some of these former employees and team members, they sometimes take it, and that enables you to actually capitalize on these longer term relationships. And then I'll give you a third idea, which is maybe a bit more strategic in this for this idea, but change is essential to every job. It's hard to imagine anything it's hard to imagine anything that's not changing. And so I have, I think you mentioned at the beginning, the SUPERBOSSES playbook. There's a bunch of tools, techniques, exercises in there, and one of them, and that I'm thinking of right now, is around change, where you ask people in your team to identify, to think about, to brainstorm on all the things that are changing around them, and then to think about what can they do about those changes. How can they convert those change situations into opportunities? And if they truly are things to be concerned about, what can you do to mitigate those risks? And so it gets people to be more forward-looking. And doing that means those people are going to start to think about the world in a more broad way than they might be today, and they're going to be more effective team members for you as well.
Wow. What does Sydney do when he's not lecturing and when he's not writing books and writing for well-known publications worldwide? How's your private life look like?
Oh, well, I like to exercise a lot. I'm a biker, cyclist. And actually, I live in a small town where Dartmouth College is, and that enables me to walk to work, which is a really nice thing. I'm a foodie. I love to cook, and all sorts of things, which is a real pleasure. And of course, I travel partly for business, partly for pleasure, and then I have a new hobby. Just like you, I'm a podcaster. I started a little while ago, and my podcast is called the Sidcast. Sid is SYD, the Sidcast, and they're conversations with interesting people. They're not only about business or leadership like we're talking about today. They're about life. They're about how people got to where they got to in their careers and their lives. It's about your families. It's about your personal life as well. And it's about a chance for people to tell their story to others. So yeah, those are a bunch of things that I like to do.
Wow. And I read here somewhere he spends his time asking questions and sometimes even answering them. So is there any question you'd like to ask today? I'm supposed to be the person questioning, but is there any question you have?
That's funny. You're surprising me with that one, because you're in the driver's seat today.
I know.
Yeah. I'll give you one question because I know we don't have a ton of time. Uh, why did you decide to go into podcasting?
So, to be honest, it's a very good question. We wanted to go into sort of content, meet interesting people, go out, and so we're a very small company, and really what we wanted to do is just reach out and see where it'll bring us. I mean, it wasn't like it was a very determined way of this is going to help us do this and this and this, but it was sort of it was a new way of building relationships and building some kind of momentum in an area where we sort of didn't know how to do it in any other way. So we're a small company. We didn't have a lot of stuff, and myself personally, it's a big thing. I never did this. I do a lot of coaching here in the region, and sort of podcasting was a different way of getting all these great people that you could meet in the old business by getting them. And so what we wanted to do is, get all these people like yourself and provide value to the audience around us, because there's a lot of people that are asking us about sort of, what is, the stuff you talk about. I mean, I had so many great people on podcasts talk about the former chief talent officer of Netflix was talking about talent management and teams. And really, we have so much positive feedback from all these people telling us, oh, it's really unbelievable what we're giving. And it all started with a simple idea of getting into, getting out of our small little circle that we sort of were playing in. And you said it best. I mean, I would go back to, Sydney and after sort of talking with you for 40 minutes, what is a super boss? A super boss is actually somebody that to some extent is like a shark. He's like a shark when he's nurturing you, he's working with you and always looking for how he can improve you. He's building new relationships. He's going out there trying to figure out what's the new idea out there. And somehow we as a little company wanted to do that because we felt we were in the circle where everything was already known. And I'm not saying we're super bosses or super companies, don't get me wrong, but it was like this internal energy of trying to get to all these great people that had all this knowledge was sort of at the bottom of it all. Did that make sense?
Yes, it does. That's great. It's a great reason to be involved, and I think it's going to add value to your network and your community.
Yes. So we finished by Sydney telling our viewers, where's the best, what's the best way of getting in contact with you if they're in whatever way. I understand you have a podcast.
Yeah. So the podcast is a really good way to stay in touch. And I welcome comments and feedback on the podcast, but because it comes out every week, every Sunday night, Monday morning, depending on what part of the world, it's a chance to kind of stay in touch with what I'm doing, and I have conversations like you do with interesting people. You could find my books on Amazon: SuperBosses, Why Smart Executives Fail, the SuperBosses Playbook. And of course, I'm on Twitter at Sid Finkelstein, as well as LinkedIn. So all the usual suspects, you can find me.
Sydney, thank you very much. To our audience, it was really wonderful hearing from you. I would once again say, what's the difference between a super boss, or what is the definition of a super boss? Go up, look into the book. But if there's one liner, I think they're intense. What I heard today is they're intense. But they really do care about people around them. And by helping develop people around them, they help develop their surrounding, including themselves. Sydney, thank you very much. And thank you very much for taking the time to be a guest on our show. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.